My flight just went directly from, I lived in Houston, so I went from Houston to JFK straight to Ghana. So it was a really long flight. There's about 7 other missionaries. There's 8 of us from America who were in that MTC batch, and there was 20 people in the MTC at the time we were there. So they just do 3-week segments now. I guess it's 2 weeks where they just pass a whole batch through. So it's not like people are in there constantly. When we arrived in Ghana, we went through customs, and all of us were very scared. We didn't know exactly what to do. And before you leave the airport, the security guards check your bags, make sure you're not bringing anything illegal into the country. And once one of the ladies saw that we were missionaries, I had a tag on. She said, "Oh, they're Mormons. Just pass them on through." So they didn't check our bags. And then one security guard stopped us again, and he checked all of our passports. And then we started going out, and the man told us to follow him, and we were all kind of concerned, like, should we trust this guy? And he said, yes, I'm from the MTC, trust me. So we just followed him, and he put us into a big white van and drove us to the MTC, and we arrived. It was probably like 2 o'clock in the afternoon, so it had been a whole night. We hadn't slept. We're all exhausted, and we just went straight into classes and dinner, because they wanted to get our schedules in line with the West Africa schedule. So that first night we were so exhausted, and I would say probably the full 2 weeks I was just so tired in the MTC. But it was great because by the time I got to the field, my schedule was aligned with West Africa. The MTC was awesome. We had outdoor activity every day. We'd go play soccer, basketball. The sun rises like at 5 a.m. and it's super bright. The teachers are phenomenal. The food is great. You start eating Ghanaian food right when you get there. It's a cafeteria, and they have a cook who cooks Ghanaian food. And then going to the Sierra Leone mission, you always leave a day earlier than the rest of the missionaries. So they all leave like on a Wednesday, and we would leave on a Tuesday and have this big goodbye thing. We're all crying and hugging each other, and then we'd take off to Sierra Leone. So in our group, there's 3 in the MTC that were going to Sierra Leone, me, another American, and a Ghanaian. And the Ghanaian was assigned our group leader, so he had the money for our trip. He had our tickets and everything. And we were dropped off at the airport. We flew to Sierra Leone. When we arrived, so the airstrip is just a little strip. There's trees kind of hanging over it. Looks very much like a jungle, kind of a wetlands jungle. So Freetown's actually a peninsula, and there's a big bay. It's the largest natural bay in the world. And then Lungi is where the airport is. So you land on Lungi, and then you have to take a ferry, a boat, or a helicopter, or a hovercraft to Freetown. So we arrived in Lungi, and they checked all of our bags, went through customs again, at just a little airport. And as we were going through the airport, there was all these people, the helicopter, the water taxi, the hovercraft, they're all trying to get us to buy their service, saying, hey, ride with me, ride with me. And we had received direction from the MTC that we should take the hovercraft, and if the hovercraft is down, then we should take the helicopter. So the hovercraft apparently had caught on fire the week before while it was there, and so the hovercraft was down, so we decided to take the helicopter. And everyone was telling us to follow them. We didn't know who to trust, and I just trusted my Ghanaian companion. He was our group leader. He just said, I'm trusting this guy, and we're going to follow him. And as we start to leave the airport, there's a whole host, probably 30 people, like yelling, looks like some kind of riot or fight. And they're like banging on the bars and trying to get into the airport to come for us. And I was terrified. And they closed the gates to the airport. Everyone's kind of reaching their arms through. I was like, what is going on? Is there a fight? And I've come to find out later they were just people who wanted to carry our bags for us so they could get a tip. But they're like fighting each other to be the one that could carry our bag. So finally the airport just opens the gate and say, okay, it's time to go. So we just walked through this group, and we had received direction not to let anyone touch our bags because they're going to expect a big tip. We didn't have money for that. So I'm just pulling my luggage, and people are trying to grab it out of my hands, and I'm just pulling it. I'm like, nope, nope. Just following my companion, and I had 2 bags. They're kind of heavy. Started falling behind, and this nice man just put his hands on my bags and pushed me through the crowd. And then I got into the next area, and it's kind of a waiting area for the helicopter. And he said, you need to go sign up. You have to leave your bags here. They're checked on the helicopter. And I was set. Like, I was told not to leave my bags with anybody. I was like, no, I'm taking my bags. And but then everyone's like, oh, you need to go over here. It was just a very high pressure situation. And then he pulled out his tag, and he showed that he worked for the airport. And he said, "My name's Michael. I'll take care of your bags." And I just trusted him. And I thought, he's like an angel. He helped me get through that crowd. He was so nice. So we got our tickets to the helicopter, ended up waiting like 30 minutes for the helicopter to come. Our luggage was loaded. There was a guy who was right in front of us. He was an American visiting, I think a tourist or something. But he said, "A helicopter last month crashed and everybody died on it. So I'm riding with you guys because God's with you." Right after he told us that he was atheist. But we got on the helicopter. The flight was awesome. We were up above Freetown. You could see the whole city. So it's like I said, it's a peninsula. And then the city is built on the mountains that feed right down into the water. And it was just a beautiful sight. So we landed in Freetown. Our mission president was there waiting with his car at the helicopter landing pad. And he drove us up to the mission home for our introductory dinner. Nowadays, I don't think they do the helicopter anymore. I think they just take the ferry. So it's a longer trip. It's a lot safer, though, and a lot cheaper. So that's getting to Sierra Leone. So the Sierra Leone Freetown Mission used to be a part of the Ghana mission. So when President Gay was there, it's probably 7 years ago now, he was the mission president over the Ghana mission, which included Sierra Leone and Liberia. So there was a few missionaries who served in Sierra Leone, a few in Liberia. Liberia had a civil war, and they pulled missionaries out of Liberia. And then President Squires, Philip Squires, was the first mission president to be called to the Sierra Leone Freetown Mission. It became its own mission in 2007, and he was my first mission president. So I arrived in 2009. He had been there for 2 years. The first missionary to get his call to the Sierra Leone Freetown Mission was Elder Ryan Michael, and I replaced him. Me and the two other guys that were with me, I met him on the day that he left and we arrived. At that time, it had only 50 missionaries in it, covering both countries, Sierra Leone and Liberia. There was a Freetown district, a Bow district, and those are the two districts in Sierra Leone. And in Liberia, there was a Monrovia district and a Bushrod Island district, which actually at the time was only one. There's just a Monrovia district. And since that time, since 2007 to now, there's been, I think, 12,000 converts. Sierra Leone now has a stake, Freetown stake. There's a Bow district and there's a Kenema district, and they're reaching out to a lot more inland branches. Liberia has 2 districts now, Monrovia and Bushrod Island, and it's just growing really fast. They're separate missions. The geographical boundary, so it used to be Sierra Leone and Liberia together. Now Sierra Leone is its own mission, Liberia is its own mission. Majority of missionaries in Sierra Leone live in Freetown, which is the capital city. There's over 1 million people that live there, and that's right on the peninsula, and it covers from the beaches all the way up to the tops of mountains in Freetown. And there's, at the time I was there's a dozen branches that were there, so now there's a lot more. Then there's the Bow district, which is 4 hours inland from Sierra Leone. It's a 4-hour drive on a paved road. It used to be dirt road when I was there. Now got paved by the end of it. And so the Bow district, there's a lot of branches there, great people. And then Kenema, when I served there, it was one branch. It's a little town. It's about an hour away from Bow. There's one branch and 2 missionaries. Now there's a full district, and there's 8 missionaries that are there. So that's the Sierra Leone Freetown Mission. One thing I learned in my first area was if a woman's pregnant, don't ask when the baby's due. It's very offensive. So just be happy for her. I just asked a woman and got an earful for it. Other advice. So there's 2 kinds of water in Sierra Leone that they sell on the streets. So there'll be little kids who sell lots of stuff on the streets. They carry it on their heads, snacks and drinks and especially water. So Grafton is the purified water, and it's in a square, looks like a baggie that's sealed up, and usually they're cooled and delicious, refreshing. And then there's the Thai water. It's a long tube, and that's usually just local water. So the local water is half the price of the Grafton water, but the Grafton water is a lot cleaner, and you'll get a lot less sick if you stick with Grafton water. Other cultural things, you always shake with your right hand. You never do anything with your left hand. You don't give money. You don't pat someone with it. You just don't do anything with your left hand. So it's always the right hand. And to show more respect, you touch your right hand with your left hand. That shows more respect. Everybody's going to shake your hand. If their hands are dirty, then they want to shake your elbow or some type of shaking interaction. So that's good to do. Respect of elders is a very big deal. So just always be respectful to the father, the mother, especially elderly people. When you're visiting with them or talking with them. I think a note about the people in general is they're very faithful. When I served in Kenema, there was a woman who lived 7 miles from the church, and she was kind of older, in her 60s, a more feeble woman, and she would walk every Saturday the 7 miles to church to clean the church building on Saturday and walk home, and then every Sunday she'd be there at church. And a lot of really faithful people like that who will give up everything for the gospel. Funerals are very common. I knew a number of people who died while I was there. And missionaries typically will be asked, if you're close to the person, to speak at a funeral. And I would always just teach the plan of salvation. If someone is Muslim and they die, they get buried the same day. So the mosque that they belong to has a wooden casket that everyone uses. So they'll pick up the body and do the burial the same day. For Christians, they'll wait about a week after, prepare the body, have an open casket. You'll give a lot of blessings on your mission, more than you can count. But the people are very believing and very faithful, and for that reason they work, and miracles do happen. Sierra Leone is a land of miracles. The people there believe very much in visions, in prophecy and revelation, and for that reason they receive visions and prophecies and revelations. People in Sierra Leone worship missionaries, definitely too much, to the point where sometimes they'd be bowing down to you as you pass. Everyone wants to hear the gospel. So you walk around and people will be calling to you saying, "Missionaries, come, teach me," and they pull out a bench, and everyone wants to hear about the gospel. Talking about God is life in Sierra Leone, and everyone's willing to listen and to experiment, and for that reason there's a lot of success, because when they do experiment, they find the truth, and they want to join, and when they join, they're converted. The majority of the country is Muslim, so it's 60% Muslim, 40% Christian, but Muslims are just as willing to listen as Christians, and you'll have Christians that go to the mosque and Muslims that come to the church, and they'll wear their full Muslim robes, but they're very willing to listen and very open. And a lot of Muslims live a lot of the same principles that LDS people live. They don't drink alcohol or smoke. They live a lot of chastity. There are people that practice polygamy in Sierra Leone. For a long time in mission, we taught them, and then we received direction not to teach them because we don't want to break up their family, but they can't practice polygamy and be a member of the church. Other things about the culture, everyone is so giving. They will always feed you as a missionary, and many people, the typical salary is $1.25 a day that people live off of, and if they have work, if they're lucky enough to have work. So a lot of people are just living day to day, hoping to find something to eat. And I had many instances where we'd come over and it was in the evening time and they had prepared a dinner, and usually it's just dry rice, so rice with some spices on it and nothing else, and they would share that with us and give us the bigger portion. And it's hard because you don't want to take it, but you don't want to offend them. So just very giving, loving, very trusting people. that are sowed in faith. Faith is just how people live from day to day. Faith that God's going to provide for them. I never met a single person that didn't believe in God. Everybody did. So that's a little bit about the culture of Sierra Leone. Weather is tropical, mild, so it's 80s almost the whole year round, so 80 to 90 degrees Fahrenheit the whole year round. There are two seasons, the wet season and the dry season. So the wet season starts, I guess it would be about August is when it really starts. October is like the rainiest month. There's always a 6-day monsoon, everyone calls it, where it rains for 6 days straight and everything floods. And then by April, it's wet season's done, and it's the dry season, and it's very dry, so it like doesn't rain for several months, and that's when you get water shortages happening, and start bathing with a water sachet you bought off the street or something. So it's beautiful though. The landscape is very tropical, lots of green trees, red dirt. Freetown is a city, so they've got tall buildings that are in it and paved roads in Freetown. When you get out of Freetown, there's one main paved road that goes through the whole country up until you reach Kenema, and then it's a dirt road to Liberia. And then besides that, they're all just dirt roads. The main mode of transportation is either taxis, so you can purchase a taxi for 1,000 leones, which is like 25 cents. And that will take you a certain distance within the city. They have kind of preset locations. Outside of Freetown, the main taxi is a motorcycle. It's actually a scooter. They call them Okadas. So it's 1,000 leones to get an Okada ride across Bo or across Kenema. And they also have poda-podas. So a poda-poda is like a big taxi. It's a van that's been shelled out, and there's lots of rows of seats, and they just pack as many people as they can get in there. And those kind of go longer distances than taxis. The food is delicious. When I first arrived, I did not like it. Rice is life. That's the motto of Sierra Leone. So you can eat bread and fruits and other stuff, but if you haven't eaten rice, you haven't eaten. So they eat rice for breakfast and dinner. So that's usually 2 meals a day, breakfast and dinner. And usually they cook it for dinner and then eat the leftovers for breakfast. That's what everyone typically eats. And almost everyone just cooks on a 3-stone fire with wood or charcoal. In the missionary apartment, though, you have an oven usually and a stove or a portable gas stove that you can use. So the food, the main staple, so it's always rice and then with different toppings. So the main topping is cassava leaf. So cassava is a root like a potato that you can just pull it up from the ground, peel it, and eat it. It's a great energy source. It actually tastes really good. But more than the root, they eat the leaves off the cassava, which are actually poisonous unless you cook them. So they peel the leaves off the cassava plant, and then they crush it up in a mortar and pestle. Then they'll add fish parts and hot peppers, onions, which are yabas, and they mix it all together, and then they boil it with palm oil. And then you put that on top of rice, so it's this kind of green goop that sits on top of the rice. And at first, when I first saw it, I was like, "What is this green goop?" And I grew to love it. It was my favorite dish. I could eat cassava all day. It's wonderful. Other popular dishes are potato leaves. So same thing as the cassava. It's from a sweet potato plant, and those, instead of crushing it, they cut them up into thin slices, cook it very much the same way, but it has a different taste. And then there's peanut butter soup. Nikki Supui and Mendy is it's a Mendy dish, and it's palm oil and ground nuts is what they call peanut butter. Ground nut paste is peanut butter, and ground nuts are peanuts. So they put ground nut in it, palm oil, fish, spices, and then you put that on top of rice, and that is very delicious. And then there's fry soup. So fry soup is just hot peppers, onions, oil, like vegetable oil, and then fish. And that one's kind of a classier dish, and it's really good as well. So those are the main staples. Then they sell bread. Fula bread is the main bread they sell on the street. It's kind of a hard bread, and a lot of nights we just have bread and eggs. We buy eggs off the street. They're never refrigerated, and don't worry, they don't make you sick. They just don't refrigerate stuff there. So the eggs and the mayonnaise and everything, they all just have it out all day. But it somehow doesn't make you sick. And so we'd eat that, or sardines on bread, pretty typically. And then there's also a few groceries, like supermarkets is what they're called. They're kind of like convenience stores. So that's where the wealthy people shop. And they've got some American dishes, canned foods, refrigerated section. If you want to get ice cream, that's where it is. So you can't buy a whole lot from there. Subsistence, you can't buy every day from there, but there's a lot of good stuff you can buy. Liberia is pretty different than Sierra Leone. It was founded by freed slaves from America. So Liberia will call themselves Little America. And there's actually been presidential candidates for Liberia whose platform has been, we're going to be the 51st state to America. So they love Americans, and they love the American lifestyle. Liberia had a civil war that ended later than Sierra Leone's. So it might have been 2005. I'm not quite sure on the date. But the rebels cut all the power lines and the water supply. So Liberia has a lot nicer buildings, like big, nice, wide roads that feel like American roads, big, tall, beautiful buildings, but a lot less running water and electricity than Sierra Leone because those were cut more recently. And they could likely be back by now. I've been home for a few years. The language is different. They call it Kolokwa, is the local Liberian language, and it's kind of a muffled English with a heavy accent. I don't even know if I could do it justice right now, so talking in it, but they can typically understand you right off the bat. In Sierra Leone, you have to kind of start changing the way you speak for people to understand you. In Liberia, you can get right there and people will understand what you're saying. And after a few weeks, you can start to understand what they're saying. The currency in Liberia is Liberian dollars, LDs. So the going rate when I was there was 70 LDs to $1. And you can also use American currency. You can use the US dollar in Liberia just as well as an LD. Liberia is a little bit more dangerous. We had our curfew had to be in by 7 p.m. every night in Liberia because you just don't want to get in trouble. And the red light district out by Painesville is kind of the most dangerous spot of Liberia, and it's a big marketplace. And one of the areas I served in Painesville, we have to walk through red light every day, and it's just a big crowd of people. Kind of have to hold your own and get through there. But the work is just as prosperous. People believe in God. The country is majority Christian, and people love going to church. So we had a lot of success there. So Liberian food is a lot spicier than Sierra Leone. So Liberians, there's a tribe in Liberia called the Kru, and they, when their children are small, rub hot peppers in their noses and ears and eyes to give them a high tolerance to pain and to hot foods. So the typical Liberian dish would be rice with just hot peppers and these thing called bitter balls. And there's little balls that are very bitter, so they grind those up with the hot peppers and the onions. They put that on top of the rice, and it's just this very bitter and hot dish. And you start to grow a fondness for it. There's also palm oil on it. But Liberia also has some really great, delicious dishes. Palm butter is, in my opinion, the most delicious Liberian food. It's the palm has this big seed with a husk around it, and there's a liquid inside of it, and so they kind of mush that out of the seed, and they cook that up with some fish or chicken and put that on top of rice, and it is so delicious. It's very good. One of the bitter dishes, it's called bitter ball soup. Tabogi is the name for it. So that one they just grind up these balls that are very small and very bitter, and then they'll add baking soda in it to make it more bitter, and then usually a slug that's about this long and this big around with these big tentacles coming out of it. And so there'll be a lot of slugs and on all this orange bitter liquid on top of rice. And that one was definitely the hardest to stomach through. So culture and traditions. There is a lot of, I don't know how to say it in a nice way. pagan or devil worship in Sierra Leone. They actually have these things they call debels, D-E-B-U-L. So it's the tribal religions that are not in line with Christianity, that a lot of people still practice. You hear of there's these cults, there's these brotherhoods and sisterhoods that children get inducted into. Usually they go through some kind of ceremony, and I don't know a whole lot of the details. I've heard from members saying they're just awful, all like the secret combinations you read in the Book of Mormon, that's what they're on. I was never exposed to a lot of it, but it does exist. The scariest moment that I had involved with it, they have these double kind of parades certain days of the week or year. I don't know when they are. Maybe there's a calendar for them, but there's kind of happier ones and there's kind of more serious ones, and pretty much you want to avoid all of them. So the happier ones, they usually get some kind of animal head. They either make it like a paper mache kind of animal head, or have a real animal head that's, like fixed on a plate or something. So then someone ends up wearing it on their head, and they've got these long tassels that come down, and there's drummers that drum behind them, and they kind of march through the street. And you're never to take a picture of a devil. If you do, they'll probably take your camera and break it. And you want to stay out of their way. And usually it's just all in good fun. Children will be dancing behind them. Typically, members stay away from them, so I would just encourage missionaries to not go towards a devil and celebrate with that. Then there's kind of a scarier devil, which is people likely, I think they take drugs or something like that. I had a companion, one of them was chasing him down, just a guy kind of covered in blood, and I don't know if is this too scary? I don't know if I should say.
I think it's interesting.
Okay. So he was covered in blood, chased my companion down. I wasn't companions with him at the time, and kind of cornered him, and the man started cutting his tongue in half with a razor blade until my companion gave him some money and he went away. So my experience with the devil, we were in Freetown, in the Freetown area, which is one of the branches in Freetown. So it's the heart of the city. We had just left this market. It was a preparation day. We're walking out of the market, and I see a taxi stop on the street. And I see everybody get out of the taxi, and there's women in it, and they're screaming, running away from the taxi. I thought, what is going on? Like, why did the taxi just stop? And that's the path we're walking to get home. And I see this man I had heard about. It's a devil. He has these two little white horns on his head. I don't know if they were glued there or something. He's covered in blood, and he has a knife in his hand that's covered in blood, staring at the taxi. And there's a man right next to him just beating these drums really fast. And so my companion was from Ghana, so I looked at him and I said, "Companion, what do we do?" He's like, "Just wait here, they'll pass us. Don't worry about it." And so after the taxi, then he turned to us and started walking right towards us. And we kind of ran behind this car, and he was going one way to get to us, and we just ran off and totally missed him. But that was a scary cultural experience. But Sierra Leone is not like that typically. Typically the people are wonderful. They are so loving. The people in Sierra Leone are among, if not, the nicest and most faith-filled people in the world. Definitely the most that I've met. I never met someone who didn't believe in God, and I never met someone people who are so giving and charitable, even in the hardest of circumstances. When they don't have almost anything, I feel like they have everything, because they love and cherish family and religion, and they put the things that matter most first, and they are happy. And I think most cases happier than many people here in America, because they know where their priorities are, and they trust in God, and they know that this life is just a short time, and they are preparing for the next life. And I feel honored to have served among such a righteous and loving people in Sierra Leone and Liberia. They went through a 10-year civil war that ended in, I think, 2001. There's a lot of history to it, but basically there was a rebel group who wanted to seize power in Freetown. This is how I understand it. And they kind of started in the bush area, started recruiting young men, taking them the youth and making them a child soldier army. There was two sides that were fighting back and forth. They invaded Freetown. I think it was, I don't know if it was 96. It's a very historic day in Freetown. They invaded, and it was kind of like terror in the city for 6 days, just guns everywhere, people dying. And went through that whole civil war. They really put the country back in terms of development. And a lot of people lost their lives, loved ones. Almost everybody knows someone who was lost in the war. There's all sorts of amputee camps from people who had their limbs chopped off in the war. And some of the areas cover those camps. But I think because of that, the people are so against war or fighting, and they're so peaceful because they just want to rebuild their country, and so loving. I was never afraid for my life. So in Sierra Leone, there's a whole lot of tribes. Mendi is most of the population is Mendi. It's the main tribe, and they typically live in Bo and Kenema. Those are like the Mendi territories. So all the leaders are Mendi, and most people you meet are Mendi. So when you're walking down the street and you hear little kids yell "Pumui, Pumui," you know you're in a Mendi area because that's a white man in Mendi. They don't get along with Timonese typically. There's been like a historical rival between Timonese and Mendis. Mendis are usually farmers, and Timonese are market people who sell the goods like in the market. And so Freetown is mainly Timony. So I don't know a whole lot besides that about Mendi and Timonese. I know some of the greetings. So Sierra Leone was an English colony that was founded by the freed slaves from England. So the Creole tribe were the people that were from Africa taken to be slaves in England, and then they were freed in Sierra Leone. And so the symbol of Sierra Leone is the cotton tree, and that's where the people were brought and set free. It was by the cotton tree. So it's a symbol of freedom. It's a republic. And for a long time, Sierra Leone was a colony of Britain. They gained their independence, but Creole is still a predominant tribe in Sierra Leone, and it is the predominant language. So the official language of the country is English, but the language that everyone speaks is Creole. So in school they teach English, but at home you speak Creole. And so most people are uneducated. Maybe I take that back. A lot of people are uneducated, and Creole is the language that everyone communicates with. So Creole it's a Franca-lingual language, so it's like a pidgin English. So there's a lot of English mixed into it, and there's some other languages mixed in, and the way you say things is different. So you can look it up online, but to say something in a future tense, like I am going, you add the word de before you say it. So instead of saying I am going, you say I did go, means I am going. And to say past tense, like I have gone or I went, would be you add the word don. So I don't go means I went or I have gone. And then been is a long time ago. So I been to go means I used to go a long time ago. So I made up a joke on my mission. Only people who speak Creole and are Mormon missionaries can appreciate it. But it's what prophet always talks about the places he used to go. And it's I've been to go. So some other common Creole phrases you say. So howdy body is how's your body? That's the typical greeting. Responses can range from the body fine, not bad. Tell God thank you, like tell God thank you, like my body's doing well. Or small. So small is kind of like not too good, not too bad, and people use it all the time. Small. Couche is the common. It's another like hello, and also means well done. Couche. And then there's a whole host of words you can look up online. There's a whole conversion from English words to Creole words. So the trash is the dirty box. Instead of saying Heavenly Father, you say Daddy God or Papa God. So to say like I know that God lives. So lives is also day, like where does he live? You would say Usaide, like which area does he live in? Which side does he live in? Usaide. So to say I know that God lives, you say I know se Daddy God de, or no se Papa God de, e and in Peking when not Jesus Christ then all two de. So that's a little bit of Creole. So the common Creole greeting is "Howdy body." It's "How is your body?" Like "How are you doing?" So the typical response is "the body fine," or "the body well," or "not bad." Not bad actually means I'm doing good, but it sounds kind of negative to us. But not bad is very typical. Couche means well done or hello. So typically older people, when they see you, they'll say couche, and you say couche back, and it goes back and forth 5 or 6 times, just couche, couche. In Mendi, I have to think of it. Okay, the Mendi greeting is kawaiena, that's howdy buddy. And then you say kaigoma, that's the body final, or tell God thank you, that's what it is. Kaigoma. Some other Mendi phrases, when you're asking someone who's going to say the prayer, you say Yamir gewo ve mamue. That's in Creole, it's who dat go pray God for we, or in English, who is going to say the prayer for us. Some Timony greetings. I can't remember Timony. I have it written down. I should have brought this. Limba is another tribe. They're a lot less populous, but the Limba greeting is uale, and the response is nama kotogo, and the response to that is ale tanto. So depending on who starts it, that's the Limba greeting. If you drop that, man, Limbas will be so excited that you know their language. Yeah, that's a little bit about the tribes. Some of the best places to visit in Sierra Leone are the beaches. Oftentimes for P-Day, or we'd have these super P-Days where the whole zone gets together. We just play volleyball or soccer on the beach. Beautiful white sandy beaches, beautiful rainforests. There's also waterfalls up by the mission home. So up behind the mission home, there's a whole road that goes to Grafton, and along that there's a few different waterfalls you can hike to that are just beautiful. There's a museum of the history of Sierra Leone in downtown Freetown, and there's actually a few nice restaurants in downtown Sierra Leone. One is a fried chicken restaurant. It tastes kind of like KFC. It's delicious. And there is a donut/kolache shop in Freetown, which is also very delicious. In Bo, there's a lot less options. The town's a lot smaller. So there's one restaurant, it's called Sabash or Sobs. So you can get a nice big burger. It's not like an American burger, but it's delicious. You can get that from Sobs. Kenema, if you live in Kenema, there's a great day hike. You just walk out from the missionary apartment and you can go right up the mountain. And there's a river you can kind of follow, and a trail that goes right up to the top of the mountain, and it's just beautiful. And then one of the most historic places of the mission in Sierra Leone is called Scott's Peak. So it's not called that in the country, and usually it's kind of up in the clouds. And on a good day, you can hike or drive or take a taxi up to the top of it. And there's kind of antennas at the top, and right where the road ends, there's a dirt pull-out area you can stop. And on a nice cool day, there'll be mist up there, and you actually feel kind of cold in Sierra Leone. So it's like the coolest spot you can get to. And from that peak is where Elder Richard G. Scott dedicated Sierra Leone for missionary work. And that's why missionaries call it Scott's Peak. And it's a beautiful sight. You can see all of Freetown. And right before you go home, right when you arrive, usually you go straight there. And right before you go home, you go up to the peak and kind of say goodbye to Sierra Leone. So those are good places to visit. In terms of health and sickness, so malaria is a big issue. It's kind of like the flu in West Africa. Like everybody gets it every year, and you're down for like a week, but it's like 10 times worse than the flu. So it's vomiting, diarrhea, achy bones, headache, high temperature, and it's just awful. So the way to avoid that is to take your anti-malaria medicine. At the time I was there, it's called doxycycline. And my first year of my mission, I had heard mixed things about it, that it's going to weaken your immune system, so when you do get malaria, it'll be a lot worse. When my second mission president came, he said, everybody is taking their doxycycline every day. And then he would take it in front of us and show us, like, you are taking your doxy. When we started doing that, we went from like 14 cases of malaria a month in the mission to 1 in 6 months. So doxycycline really works. I had malaria once on my mission. It was before I took doxycycline every day, and recovered pretty miraculously in 2 days. But it was very awful. But it's not life-threatening typically if you get the right treatment, and all the missionary apartments are stocked with medicine. So if you get malaria, the treatment's there in the apartment, you take it immediately. Another big health issue is typhoid. So typhoid comes when there's bacteria in your food or water that you drink. I don't know the proper name. Fecal matter. So if there's fecal matter in your food or water, and you drink or eat that, it's a very easy way to get typhoid. So the big thing is just make sure you wash your hands all the time before you eat. The food that you do eat, make sure whoever's preparing it is wearing gloves or using a spoon or something. They're not grabbing it with their hands. Water, there's purifiers in the apartments, so always purify your water. You can get purified water on the street, but usually the bags are dirty because they've been in dirty water. Cooling down, so you want to bring some kind of wipe or something to wipe off the edge so you can bite into it and drink the water. Then just staying hydrated. It's very easy to get dehydrated in Sierra Leone. You're walking up and down mountains, especially in the dry season. It's very hot and very dry and very sunny, so you have to drink a lot all throughout the day. Those are the main health issues. The other thing was boils. I had 2 boils on my fingers, and just huge and nasty and very painful. So I was using Irish Spring soap, thinking it smells delicious. It's got to be very powerful. There's actually no antiseptic in Irish Spring soap. So I'd recommend getting a good antiseptic soap to use, washing your hands, washing your body every day. So just basically keeping good hygiene will keep you healthy and go a long way. I had a companion who had typhoid and malaria every single transfer until he started taking his doxycycline every day. So typhoid is a lot worse than malaria. Extreme vomiting, you're down and sick for a week or 2. I don't know all the symptoms of typhoid. I know it's worse than malaria. So some of the symptoms of malaria are if you have a fever, if you're vomiting, diarrheal, and if your joints are aching. It feels kind of like they're on fire. All of your joints are on fire. Then you probably have malaria. So that's when you want to call the mission president's wife, let her know, get a blessing from your companion, and take the malaria medicine treatment. Another health issue is worms. So it's easy to get worms from the food. So there's worm medicine that you can take as well. That's in the missionary apartments. And that one, usually same kind of symptoms. You're diarrheal, you're not gaining a whole lot of weight, and irritation in the stomach. You can, I don't know if this is too much, that you can probably expect to be diarrheal most of your mission. It's pretty common. Most missionaries are, but it's just trying to eat a healthy, balanced diet. So our big thing was brat, bread, rice, applesauce or toast. Bananas, rice, applesauce, or toast. Brat is how to get rid of, they call it run belly. It's diarrhea, so it's pretty common. When the fundamentals of Preach My Gospel were introduced, they were introduced a year into my mission and totally revolutionized our mission. We went from 40 investigators of the baptismal date as a mission to over 1,000 in 2 months once we got the fundamentals. And that's what I taught the MTC. So that's what I would just encourage missionaries preparing to serve is study Preach My Gospel and study the fundamentals of Preach My Gospel, because those are the how-to skills that are going to prepare you to teach. And especially now the MTC is focused on the fundamentals, since that's how to teach. Now missionaries need to learn the content on their own. So I would, if I could serve again, I would definitely prepare myself by reading the content, knowing the lessons before I enter the MTC. For myself, I had two older brothers who served missions. I was excited to serve. In high school, actually, I got really involved in this group called Invisible Children. So they raise awareness about this war in Uganda. And I really wanted to go to Africa, and all my friends knew it. And when I got my mission call to West Africa, all my friends are non-members, and they all said, "Oh, you must have told them you wanted to go to Africa." I said, "No, I didn't tell anybody." It was just the right place. The Lord wanted me, and it was the best mission. I loved it. It was definitely a life-changing experience. I've always known that growing up in America, we have freedoms and affluence that makes us very blessed. But I never understood what that meant until I went to Sierra Leone and lived there. My whole mission, we didn't have running water. I mean, you have it in the tap, but not from a shower. So a lot of times you're collecting water from a bucket that's rainwater, and then you're bathing with that. And the extreme poverty that so many people are in just makes you realize how blessed we are to have so much affluence. I mean, even if you don't have little, if you have a shelter over your head, food to eat every day, that's amazing, you know. And I definitely believe that, at least for me in my life, I absolutely want to use everything I'm given to help those who don't have as much opportunity. It's my dream to go back to Sierra Leone and to help people, and I have tried to reach out to people there and help in ways that I can. I would say there's a lot that we can do. I think the reason people it's hard to donate to kids in Africa is you don't see them. You don't have any kind of connection with them. You don't know where your money's going. And I think there's right ways to do it and wrong ways. I think the church is the right way to donate. When you're donating fast offerings, those get redistributed to people in need. And there are so many people in Sierra Leone who have so little, like 1 or 2 sets of clothing, looking every day for something to eat. And the fast offering system through the church is a great way to help people in need, but still build self-reliance. And I saw that on my mission. The church helps people to get out of poverty and to be self-reliant, to stay out of poverty, and has all sorts of job training things that they do, and job employment matching things that they do. So I would encourage giving in that way. And other ways that you can donate, and perhaps even just going there, visiting the people, and seeing the way that they live, and recognizing how blessed we are, I think will change your heart to want to give. This is one story. It's very close to my heart. In my first area, there was a drought in Freetown, and there's a main water line there's a reservoir that would provide the main water for Freetown that would run through the tap. And somehow it had gotten broken, and so there was no main water line, and there had been no rain for a long time. So there was a drought. In our apartment, we have these big 5-gallon drums we would store water in, and we'd been using it for a while, and the water was, very low, so a total of a few gallons in the whole apartment. And usually if it gets low, we'd call the mission office, and they'd send someone out with water, but since the main water line was down, there was no water. And I just remember waking up and getting ready, and we'd been sweaty from the day before. We had done a service project, just covered in sweat and dirt and grime, and had my mission clothes on. I was pretty young, new in the mission. I thought, man, I can't do this. This is so hard. I can barely study and focus, being so dirty, and we're just saving our water just to drink because there's so little water left. And I was a little scared, and I was reading my scriptures for personal study, and the Spirit just hit me and said, "Why haven't you prayed for water?" And I grabbed my companion and said, "Companion, we need to pray for water." So we knelt down together and we prayed. And then he showed me a lesson in faith. Right after we prayed, his name's Elder Agama from Ghana, he went outside and lined the floor with these buckets that would, the ceiling would catch the water and run off and drip into the buckets. And there's not a sight of rain in the area, but he just lined the rain buckets out, waiting for water. So we went back to our studies, and I kid you not more than 5 minutes later, I heard the thunder, and the rain just started pouring down, and it filled all of our buckets. And right as it filled up, the tap came back on, and there was water, more than enough water. It was overflowing from our buckets, and it just let me know that Heavenly Father was watching over us. He knew what we were doing. He knew what we needed, and we just had to ask Him. So I'm really grateful for that experience. So my first area, we met a young man named Matthew Bassey Charles. I had not met him. I met him. The missionaries had been teaching him for 2 weeks when I arrived in the mission field. He had seen a missionary on the street, heard him say the name Joseph Smith talking about it, but knew nothing about it. And then had seen the name of the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. And one night, Matthew was asleep. It was a Saturday night. And he said all that day before he'd gone to sleep, the name Joseph Smith just kept coming into his mind. Joseph Smith, Joseph Smith. And as he went to sleep, he kept tossing and turning and was dreaming about this Joseph Smith. And woke up in the morning, and the Spirit told him, you need to go to the Latter-day Church. That's a lot of people call it Latter Days. You need to go to Latter Days. And so he just got in his church clothes, and he walked to the church. It was the middle of a sacrament meeting, and he sat down next to the missionaries and said, hey, I want to learn more about your church. And I had the honor of teaching that wonderful young man, and he taught his family, and now he's serving a mission in Nigeria. Another story in my last area was this big mountain called Dwarzak, and it was a wonderful branch. Had this super branch president who's now a bishop, and he was just on top of everything. And we had been teaching a family who lived at the top of the mountain, and they had a little rice shack called a bafa. So bafa is where, just like a restaurant, but it's a little hut where she'll cook rice and some kind of soup for the day, and people can go there and purchase the meal. So we went to her bafa, which is where we usually taught her, and she wasn't there. And there was a little girl who came with an empty dish. She was hoping to buy some food for her family. And we knew where the woman lived, so we went to her house, and the little girl followed us, went to the house, and we were knocking on the door looking for this family, and they weren't there. And the little girl started walking off, and then the Spirit told me, follow that little girl. And I didn't want to be creepy or anything, but I just started walking the same path she was walking. It was right up the mountain. And the little girl went to this older woman, and I asked the woman, I said, is that your daughter? And she said, no, Nami Grandpeking, which is my granddaughter. And then the woman looked at us as if she was expecting us. She said, come, follow me, follow me. And so we just followed her, and she brought us to her home, and she brought out a bench. And then we sat down. We said, hi, we're missionaries. We told her what we're missionaries for the Church of Jesus Christ of Latter-day Saints. We have this message. And she couldn't speak English very well or Creole. She was very tribal. But she went into her home and grabbed a picture of her son. And she said, this Nami Peking. You need to meet him. And we just kept teaching this lesson to this woman. And as we were talking, her son arrived and sat down and was the most golden investigator ever taught. He loved the lesson, and right after the lesson, Institute was starting, and he walked down the mountain to go to Institute, and within 3 weeks he was baptized, and now he's almost done with the mission in Nigeria as well. Before I left on my mission, I thought I had the strongest testimony, and I was just determined to be a rock star missionary. Thought nothing could bring me down. I arrived in the MTC and felt like that was all shaken. I was questioning my testimony. How firm was I really? Then I kind of built it up in the MTC and arrived in the mission field, and day 2 hit, and once again I was wondering, do I really know this is true? Can I really do this? And can I be gone for 2 years? Can I devote all of my heart to this? And that question stayed with me for several weeks. And I was reading the Book of Mormon feverishly. I had read it before, but this time was with a new passion. I had to know if what I was doing was true. And I just remember I finished the Book of Mormon within a few weeks of being there in the field. And I went to my little bedroom next to my bed with its mosquito net, and I kneeled down and asked Heavenly Father, is this really true? Is this book true? Is Thomas S. Monson really a prophet? Does he speak your words? Is this your church? Is it all true? And I received the clearest witness I've had, as if the veil was parting, and I could feel Heavenly Father's love and peace enter my heart beyond description. And all the worries of being away from home, being without water, in this hot new environment, all of it melted away. And I knew that it was true and that it was worth everything. And I promised the Lord that I would serve with all of my heart, my whole life long, to build his church, to spread his gospel, and to save his children. I'm so grateful for the opportunity I had to serve a mission, to wear that name tag, bear the name of Christ on my heart. I saw it change people's lives, and it absolutely changed my life, and they changed my life. I would plead with all of my heart that if you have a chance to be a missionary, to take it, to serve the Lord and his children. And if you are investigating this church, to really ask Heavenly Father, and I know that you will receive a witness. And I leave this with you in the name of Jesus Christ. Amen.
I arrived in Sierra Leone, took a plane straight from Ghana to Sierra Leone, and the airport in Sierra Leone is located way out on the end of a peninsula. So you can either take like an hour or 2 hour detour around this peninsula, or you can take transport across the water to get to the main Freetown, to get to the main heart of the city, Freetown. And so they have different options that you can take to get across the water. While I was there, they had a ferry, a giant hovercraft, a speedboat, a helicopter. I think those are all the ones that were available while I was there. But when I first arrived, we took a helicopter from the airport to meet up with our mission president on the other side of the water, and that was cool. It was like I think they said like old Russian military helicopter that they had acquired somehow. It was a lot of fun though. I came onto the mission with 2 other elders, one from Ghana and then one from the United States, and so it was just us 3 riding together in this helicopter. Then we arrived and met up with our mission president, and he brought us straight to the mission home. When we were at the mission home, we stayed there for I think 1 night before our companions that we were going to would be ready for us, and he assigned us to our companions, and we slept overnight at I think the assistant's apartment actually, and then the next day, they took us in the van off through Freetown to where we would be serving. One of the missionaries actually headed straight to Liberia first off, and because back when the mission was combined between Sierra Leone and Liberia, they had to do that. Some go to one place first, and the other American companion, or the other American missionary, and I started in Sierra Leone, and so it took us to our apartments. I remember right when I arrived at my apartment, boy, I got a taste of Africa because it was raining like crazy. Like you don't see rain like that around here very often, but it was raining like crazy, and so I had all my nice new missionary clothes, and as soon as I walked out of the van, soaking wet before I could even get to the door in my apartment. But yeah, and at that point, I was kind of in culture shock. I was like, "Holy smokes, what is going on? What is happening?" But I was super excited at the same time. So it was a really cool first little bit. I guess as I was as I was adjusting and trying to get used to everyday life in Africa, I can say that it was really hard. Now I think a lot of missionaries experience that going onto their missions, because it's something that I've never experienced before. When I first arrived in Africa, I remember thinking, there is nothing here that I've ever seen or ever heard before. Every smell I had never smelled, every sight I had never seen, every person I had never been acquainted with anyone like that before. It was, everything I saw was just backwards. It's like you're on the other side of the world. I mean, I guess you kind of are, but you're just put in a situation where nothing is familiar, and so it becomes hard when you can't revert back to your nice warm bed or your best friend or your parents or anything, because you can't even like flip on the TV and see something that you've seen before. It was very different, and that was hard, because I had to get used to a completely different normal. I was shocked, but at that point, I was really grateful for the one thing that was the same, and that was God. That is the one thing that I found was the same no matter where you go. You still have the moon, you still have the stars, and you still have God. That's pretty much it. Everything else is different, and so I prayed a lot during that first little bit in Sierra Leone. I mean, you pray a lot as a missionary, but I spent large amounts of time on my knees just, asking for help, because I didn't know what to do. It was the first situation that I had been in where I literally had no clue, I mean, I'd heard this is what missionaries do, and I was slowly being taught how that works in Africa. And but I did get used to it, and it honestly didn't take as much time as I thought. Within a few weeks, I had kind of gotten down to what's normal in Sierra Leone and what kind of to expect. Luckily, I had a great trainer who taught me a lot of things. This is how we get by in Sierra Leone, and so I learned about the money, about the food, about the people, about what the culture is like, what the people tend to be like, and I learned a lot really quickly. My companion was great. He took me straight out on the field as soon as I arrived. I pretty much arrived, set my stuff down. He's like, "Oh, we got an appointment in 20 minutes." I'm like, "Oh, great!" I was all ready and headed out. And I can still remember my first teaching appointment. And the very first thing I remember noticing in my first teaching appointment was, okay, these guys are speaking English, but it's not the English that I'm used to. And so I kind of tried to mimic it. It's similar to like Sierra Leone is a British colony, and so they have kind of a British influenced accent. It's kind of it's closer to British than it is American English, and so I remember trying to mimic that when I first got there and kind of failing. It was more of a cheesy British accent that I kind of ended up pulling off, but I learned quickly, and just put one foot forward and just kind of dove into things, and I begun to really enjoy it really fast. I remember one of the first emails that I sent home to my mom to my parents, and I told them, I've noticed being here that I do the exact same things every day. When you're at home, you kind of, one day you may have this class, or one day you may have this thing you're doing with your friends or whatnot, but on the mission, you're more or less doing the same thing every day, going out, preaching the gospel, going to lessons and things like that. But I told her, I said, if I'm going to be doing the same thing every day for 2 years, it's going to be preaching the gospel. That is the one thing that if I had to choose one thing to do every day, that would be it. And that sometimes remembering that later on in my mission that I had said that helped me, because it's true. That's the best thing to be doing every single day if it's going to be just one thing. Most missionaries there are living in houses that are mostly made of cement. Not always a guarantee of running water and electricity, but the mission does a great job of taking care of you. You always have a generator that you can start to get electricity, and usually you'll do that in the night. You can do things like charge your cell phone, or heat water for showers in the morning if you want. And running water depends on where you are, how much of it they have. When you You learn how to take a shower by using a bucket of water. Get a bucket full of water, get a cup, dip the cup in the bucket, and start dumping water on your head. And you kind of learn how to shower with about roughly a gallon or two of water, and you can take a full shower with that. And some other things as you go out into the community, most of the roads are completely dirt. When you buy food, they do have some kind of supermarkets, they call them, but it's more of just an indoor market. Any market that's really indoors, they call a supermarket, where food is a little bit more expensive. And sometimes you can find things that are imported if you want. There's a lot of our food that we bought came from very small shops. There's a particular tribe in Africa called the Fula Tribe, and this tribe they're spread all over West Africa, and they have a I don't know if it's a tradition or just a tendency to build small shops where they just sell common, everyday needed items, like things like bread or powdered milk or rice and candies and just things that you would eat every day. And so we would go to these little shops and we'd buy things like bread and eggs and bread and eggs, and we ate bread and eggs a lot, and because it's more or less that, or rice, or we eventually did find one that had kind of like ramen noodles. We tried those for a little while. Cornflakes, you can find cornflakes, but if you want to eat them with milk, you're going to have to make do with powdered milk, which some elders liked it, some elders didn't, but and I liked it to a certain degree. It's nowhere near as good as fresh milk, but it's let's see. There's also what they call them local markets. We would refer to them as open air markets, though, like markets that are just out on the street, where people have it's just stand after stand after stand of individuals selling goods that they've either grown or goods that they've bought in bulk and then separated for retail. And they'll sell spices and fruits and vegetables and beans and rice and fish, and sometimes they'll make little candies and sell them there. But most of the basic commodities that the people there eat are bought in these local markets. And it's kind of a fun experience to walk through one of these markets. And we bought rice from them. We bought things from them occasionally, and it was really fun, because one thing about buying things in Sierra Leone is they do a lot of bartering. If it's anything that's more than just what would translate over to be like $1 or $2, they will barter, and so you learn how to kind of get the price that you want and not pay too much for things. But that was something that was kind of new. Here we have a price tag on everything. There they just negotiate on everything, and so that's kind of a fun thing to do. Some other things about day-to-day life. Kind of a day in the life of a missionary there is solid appointments. You are just moving from one appointment to the next, to the next, to the next, to the next. And you fill your entire day full of appointments. We would usually have ours average about 45 minutes to an hour, but different missionaries would do it a little bit differently sometimes. But it's more or less just back to back. You can even skip lunch if you want and still have enough appointments to go throughout the day, which I did probably a few too many times because I just wanted to teach and just wanted to continue. And but that was more or less what it was, from the time you wake up to the time you return to your apartment. And it can become tricky because you're dealing with a people that don't always deal with time very well. In Africa, things are very laid back. They don't have the same, minute by minute scheduling that we do here in America. They just it's kind of relaxed, and I kind of learned to really enjoy that lifestyle and kind of how relaxed it was. But when you're trying to schedule appointments and say, we're going to come at 4 o'clock, and then you come at 4 o'clock and they're doing something else or they're not there, it's not because they hate you or they're trying to avoid you or something. It's just a lot of the time it's just because they weren't paying attention to time, or they didn't have a clock that they could look at for some reason, or things like that. So I've said before that any missionary that that comes out of that mission would make a good receptionist, because you're constantly having to run a schedule, and when an appointment bounces, you're filling it with something else to try and keep the time as productive as possible, and you're dealing with a lot of investigators. There was one point where I counted the investigators that we were trying to make contact with, and we had like 40 or something like that, and it's almost impossible to see them all in a week, and so you have to prioritize. As a missionary, you have to kind of spend time with those that you feel need it the most, those that are progressing the fastest, and there are a lot of what are termed as golden investigators. If you'll find people that are definitely ready, and they're ready to hear the gospel, and they're ready to just grab a hold of it, and they'll take it as fast as you'll give it to them. And so I ended up spending a lot of time just seeing those people and getting them done with the lessons, baptizing them, teaching them some of the lessons after baptism, and then moving on to the next people on the list, because they that's kind of how the nature of the work was there. Just so many people that you can teach, and you just have to decide which ones you're going to teach and which ones, and so that it comes as inspiration between you and your companion, how you're going to prioritize your time, and just deciding on that. But that's what you can look forward to day to day. There is just lots and lots of teaching. And on P days, P days is kind of like, it's a preparation day, and they call it that for a good reason. It's occasionally we had time to do fun things, like we would go and play soccer or something like that, which is a huge sport over there. And whenever you're playing a sport, it's always soccer, because that's just, there they call it football. Football is life, but when most of the time we didn't have time to do that. We were too busy trying to get enough food to last us for the rest of the week, doing our shopping, cleaning the apartment, getting everything ready, doing everything that we couldn't do during the week, because we were literally so back to back, filled with appointments during the whole week. And so on P Day, which was when I was there, at least, was Monday, and we would just pretty much spend the entire day just getting everything prepared for the rest of the week, and getting whatever we could done around the apartment and things like that. As far as transportation in Sierra Leone is done by mostly by walking. There's as far as I know, there's not really any bikes there. So wherever you go, you're most likely going to be walking a lot, unless you're traveling to a place that is a lot longer away. Then you'll take what is called a poda. Now, poda is pretty much just a van, an older style van, not even a huge van, but they have taken all the seats out of it, and they've put in their own fabricated seats to the point where you're getting about 19 people in this relatively small van. And these vans kind of run a route like a bus would almost, and then you have a poda that's going from one place to another. You climb on, and then they'll make stops along the way to pick people up and to drop people off. And there's a guy on there that you pay as when you're sitting there, and he'll go around and collect money from all the people on the bus, and you learn to get very close and very friendly with the person next to you, because they're 4 people in a seat, and if one of those people is bigger than the others, then you just end up having to really, really squish. And in Liberia, they have taxis mostly in Liberia. There's small little Nissan cars that operate as taxis, and in Liberia they put 4 people in the back of a normal sized car, which would normally fit 3. But 4 means more money, So they'll put 4 people in there, and every person pays for themselves. And the taxis run almost like a bus as well. The taxis will also have a route that they're going, or a specific place that they're going to. And so if you're going to either that place or somewhere along the way, you grab that taxi and you go there. But in Liberia, another common thing is motorcycles. Now, not too many people in the world, not too many places in the world, I don't think they have commercial motorcycles. But there are just people riding around on motorcycles, and they're all doing it for business. People aren't just riding motorcycles usually for fun. Most of the motorcycles that you see, they're riding it for business. And so you just hail a motorcycle rider like you would a taxi. They stop by, you hop on the back and tell them where you want to go. Now, motorcycles run more like we would have a taxi run here, where you get on and you tell them where you want to go, and they'll go there. And you can fit sometimes 2 or 3 people on one of these motorcycles, and I think different mission presidents have different regulations on how they're going to allow missionaries to use these motorcycles, because of course motorcycles are inherently a bit more dangerous. And but I did a lot of riding around on those. In fact, in Sierra Leone they do that a little bit too. Not quite as much as Liberia maybe, but they do have motorcycles there too. And so we would occasionally use those, particularly if we had a place that they could only get to by motorcycle. There wasn't anyone running a route to that place, or if we were in a hurry, because they are faster too. They're faster to use a motorcycle. Weather in Sierra Leone and Liberia. When most people think of Africa, they think, oh, savannas and lions and tigers and elephants and whatnot. But in Sierra Leone, it's very much tropical. It's on the coastline, and so a lot of people don't know that there's a tropical rainforest in Africa, but there is. And so that's kind of what you're living in the heart of in Sierra Leone and Liberia. So there's not really a cold time of year. It's just, I think I measured one time, you're about 9 degrees away from the equator. So it's hot and humid. Like, I've never experienced humidity like there is in Africa. And I remember when I walked off the airplane in Ghana, it was like hitting a wall of water. Just poof, the air is just thick. And so it makes you, it doesn't, even though the temperature probably doesn't get much above the 80s, it still makes you sweat a lot. And so that's one thing you have to be prepared for, is sweating. And so that you sweat a lot. There's, in Sierra Leone and Liberia, because it's in that part of the world, they have what is called a wet and a dry season. In the wet season, it rains a lot. And so it rains probably, I grew up in Utah, and I think that they probably receive more rain in about 4 hours than we receive in an entire year there. It rains, and when it rains, it pours. It'll rain so hard that I remember holding an umbrella above my head, and the rain was coming through the umbrella because it was hitting it so hard. It's just dumping buckets of water on top of your umbrella. And so consequently, there's a lot of mud during that time of year, because they don't have a whole lot of paved roads. They are getting them. The country is definitely developing and getting things like roads, but for the most part, you're walking around on dirt paths, and dirt paths turn into mud paths when it's raining. And so I've heard of elders slipping when they're going up a mountainside, and you get mud all over you. But it's just part of life. And then during the dry season is less rain, and so these dirt paths that you are walking on become dust paths. And so you can call it the rainy season or dry season. I call it the mud season or the dust season. It just depends on what you're going to get all over your shoes that day. Is it going to be mud or is it going to be dust? And so during the dry season, like I said, it's a lot of dust. You're not dealing with the rain quite as much. You're still dealing with a lot of humidity, more than is common in most other places, but there is less rain. The rainy season, dry season each last for approximately 6 months. It's about half and half. Half the year is wet and half of it is dry. But there was one time. Here's a good experience dealing with rain. There was one time that I was in my very first area, actually, with my trainer, and it must have been the rainy season, because one day a storm kicked up that it was one of the storms to end all storms. It seems like every year they have one of these just torrential storms. And it was started at the beginning of the day before we had gotten a chance to go out. And to go out to the rest of the town from our apartment, we had to cross a road, a dirt road. But during the rain, this road became a river. And so during this particular rainstorm, it was literally a raging torrent. Just imagine whitewater rafting down the road in front of your house. You could probably do it. But there we talked on the phone with the assistants, and they said, go out if you can, but don't feel pressured to try and brave this if you don't have to. And I remember living in my apartment, there was one other companionship, and they tried going out that day at first, and there really was not a better way to get out other than crossing this road. And so they tried getting across the road, and one of them got knocked down. Either they fell in a hole or the current pushed them over or something, and they fell in the water and they came back to the apartment. And so we waited it out for a little while longer before we tried to brave it. And I remember another time in that same area, still with my trainer, in fact, that it started, we were already out. It was already partway through the day, and this is actually when we were heading home. So it was more in the evening time, and my trainer and I got caught in this huge rainstorm, and so of course we took shelter for a little while, but when it doesn't stop and you have to get back to your apartment, you just got to brave it. And we only had one umbrella, and it was the umbrella that I had brought on my mission. Very small umbrella, because I wanted it to be compact so I could carry it around with me, but it ended up to be a little bit too small because my companion was kind of a broad-shouldered guy, and I was kind of a thin guy, but the two of us, I held the umbrella, and we just kind of wrapped our arms around each other and just started booking it through this rain, just as close as we could get. And still, rain coming down through the umbrella, because no umbrella is equipped for that rain, I don't think. And then we got to this raging river, and in order to get back to our apartment, and so the only way to get to our apartment is to cross this river. And so we both kind of just ran through the water as fast as we could, trying to preserve our shoes, because it's not that fun to walk in wet shoes. But anyway, we made it back. No one ever really got hurt in the rain, I don't think, but we sure had our share of adventures sometimes getting through that rain. Food in Africa is rice. Rice is life, and I think that in a lot of countries in the world it probably is, but it's no different in West Africa. Rice is life. Rice is cheap. It has the nutrients that they need, and they have, of course, their own local ways of preparing it. And in Sierra Leone and Liberia, they have slightly differing recipes, but particularly in Sierra Leone, in Liberia as well, they put on top of the rice, they prepare rice, they boil up the rice, prepare it, and then they put what is called plaças on top of it. Now, plaças, the best way that it was described to me by an American companion is plant sauce. Plaças is like plant sauce, and pretty much it means any type of plant that they have. What they'll do is they'll get a plant, some usually leaves of some sort, and they'll grip them in their hand, and then they'll use a knife and they'll kind of cut off the very top, and then they'll inch it up a little bit, cut off the very top again, and inch it up a little bit. So they'll just have this bunch of leaves, and it ends up looking kind of like if you were to take lettuce and throw it in a blender. It would just chop it up into a million little pieces. That's kind of what it ends up looking like. And they put that in a pot. They put tons of oil into it, a few different spices. There's a spice there that is really common called Maggi. It's like a kind of a bouillon kind of a spice, and they throw a bunch of that in and a whole bunch of oil, boil it up, and so then it ends up becoming this sauce kind of a thing. This kind of the consistency of it would be, it's a very unique consistency, and it just goes right on top of the rice. The oil drips all down into the rice. The common oil there is palm oil, because there's a lot of palm trees there, and so they use lots and lots and lots of palm oil. And they put palm oil in this plaças, put it on the rice, and then you just eat it just like that. And there are different plants that they'll use. They'll use a common one in Sierra Leone is cassava leaf. So if you don't know what cassava is, you can look it up on the internet. But it's a plant that's grown in tropical climates, and the plant basically is like I think it's like a tuber, kind of like a potato. But it's long and thin, grows underground. But what they'll do in Sierra Leone is they'll cut the leaves off of it when it's just a really young plant. When it just has sprouted, they'll start harvesting the leaves off of it, and they'll use them. They'll cut them up, like I said, and put them in this plaças, which they'll put on their rice. They also use some sweet potato leaves. You know, they have local species of sweet potatoes that they'll do the same thing when the plant is young. They'll cut off the leaves and they'll put it in they'll make it into a plasas and put it on their rice. But some other common foods, and again, it's just more things that they put on their rice. You know, rice is the thing that they eat, but some other common things that they put on it is seafood, because both Sierra Leone and Liberia are right next to the ocean, and so fishermen will go out into the ocean and they'll catch fish, and so the fish is a pretty cheap meat, and so they'll get fish and they'll cook the fish. They'll either fry the fish, or I think sometimes they might boil it, but a lot of the time is fried, and they'll just throw the entire fish in there though. They won't like, oh, I'm going to fillet this fish and pull all the bones out. No, they just throw the whole fish in there and you get to deal with the bones, which was probably my least favorite part about the food, is just having to, deal with these fish bones that were in my food. Other common foods is, they have other things too. There's some crab that they'll sometimes throw in it, little tiny crabs, or really small shellfish that are there. In Liberia, there's a dish called palm butter. It's a palm butter, but and it's taken from palm nuts. They'll take palm nuts and they'll beat them in a giant mortar and pestle. That's one of the most common things that they use for cooking. Like a mortar and pestle that you'd think of that you can grind spices with, just times that by like 20. And it's this big, huge wooden thing with a big rod that they'll put whatever it is they want to smush and want to mash up in it, and then they'll beat it and turn it into a mush or a powder or something like that. But they'll process a lot of their foods with that, and they'll do sometimes leaves, like instead of cutting them, sometimes they'll beat them. But anyway, in Liberia, they'll do that with the palm nuts, and they end up getting like a oily, buttery kind of thing, and they'll put that on top of their rice, and it's actually pretty good. My favorite African dish, though, is fufu. Now, if I were to describe fufu to you, it's kind of like a dough. It's like a dough that is put in a bowl, and then a soup is poured over it. One of the few dishes that actually doesn't have rice in it is fufu. And it's different depending on the country that it's made in. In Sierra Leone, they'll make it using just cassava. Just solely cassava, and they'll boil up the cassava so that it's nice. Cassava is like this tuber kind of a plant that grows underground. So they'll boil it up kind of like you would boil potatoes, and then make it soft, and they'll just smash it up in their mortar and pestle and knead it, and it ends up becoming kind of like a dough. And then, like I said, they'll put soup on it, and the way you eat it is you just grab a ball of the dough and kind of dip it in the soup, or you get some, if they have some fish in there, get some fish meat on it and stick it in your mouth and swallow it down. It's the hardest thing to get over not chewing, because you don't chew. It would be pointless to chew. You just swallow it down. That's the way you eat it. In Ghana, they make it differently. And I had a lot of Ghanaian companions. That's how I got introduced to Ghanaian fufu. But in Ghana, they'll make it with cassava and plantain. They'll do the same exact thing. They'll boil up plantains and boil up cassavas and mix the two. And it ends up making the dough a little bit firmer. And that's actually my favorite, is the Ghanaian fufu. I could eat that all day. And there's a soup that they like to put with it called groundnut soup. And groundnut is ground nut, and groundnuts is what they call peanuts. I guess probably because they grow on the ground, but they call peanuts groundnuts. And so they'll make a sauce using a lot of peanuts, and so it's a kind of a peanutty soup that they'll use it. They'll sometimes eat it with rice, but a lot of time it's eaten with fufu, and that's my favorite dish. I could eat that like crazy. And like I said, at first, when you're getting used to the consistency of this food, it's different. It's different than anything I've ever had in America. But it's really good. After, I think most missionaries that eat it come to really like it. The first time it's like this, wow, interesting, but it quickly grows on you, and you end up really enjoying it. I think as far as most missionaries anyway. let me think, other foods. Oh, another part of the best part about food in Sierra Leone is the fruit. Boy, they've got fruit that we don't even have here, and they have so much of it, and it's so good. Mangoes are the first thing that come to mind. They have fresh mangoes during mango season. You know, just a month or so, or a couple months out of the year is when the mangoes start to ripen. And in Sierra Leone and Liberia, mango trees are like in America we have maple and oak. They just have mangoes. Like everyone has a mango tree in their yard. Mango trees are all over the mountains. Mango trees are all over the sides of the road. And so mangoes, during mango season, the whole entire country just gets covered in mangoes. And they're you get them straight off of the tree, and they're fresh and they're ripe, and it's unlike it's hard to find mangoes in a supermarket here in the United States that taste that good, that are that fresh and that ripe. Missionaries like to indulge on mangoes a little bit during mango season, but it's fantastic. Another thing is coconut. Coconut is one thing that's available all year round. That's one thing that doesn't seem to really have a season. And what they'll do with coconut is they'll pull it straight off the tree, usually when it's pretty young, and it doesn't actually have a hard shell on it, like you would think of coconut here in the store. It doesn't have a hard shell on it. It just has like a green husk, and inside the green husk is milk. And if the coconut is picked early enough, then the meat inside the coconut that normally you would think of as being hard is not. It's kind of like a jelly kind of thing. And I think it tastes way better than hard coconut, personally. But they'll sell it on the street. They'll get wheelbarrows, and they'll fill a wheelbarrow full of coconut, and they'll walk around the street, and you can buy them for very, very cheap and enjoy fresh coconut milk as you're out walking around. They call it coconut water, but whatever. But that's delicious as well. They have bananas all year round, and they have pineapple all year round. They also grow a couple other things. I mean, they have cucumbers. They have some native fruits that you don't see as much around here. One called soursop, S-O-U-R-S-O-P. You can look it up. It's a pretty good fruit. One that they call monkey apples. I have yet to translate that into what the real name for it is. They have star fruit. In Sierra Leone, they call it five-finger apple because it's a fruit that's shaped kind of like a star. Like if you were to cut it in half, it would be a star on the inside, and it tastes very similar to an apple. That's really good. But as far as a lot of the other vegetables that we have that grow that we can get in the supermarket, not a ton. You can find occasionally. You can find carrots. Maybe you can find potatoes. You can find sweet potatoes there very commonly. Sweet potatoes is way more common than just a normal, like a russet potato that you would find in the store here. But the sweet potatoes there are really good. It's a different species of sweet potato that's kind of purplish on the inside. So good. A lot of people will fry them up and sell them on the side of the road. Kind of like, not quite like potato chips, but more just like French fries. Kind of like French fries, but they just cut them up into chunks, fry them, sell them on the side of the street. And some of the food that's sold on the side of the streets there. Sure. They of course, they'll warn you about food that is sold on the streets because, they don't really have an agency that makes them handle food properly or anything like that. So it's not always the best idea to eat it, but they do sell some really good food on the side of the street. A lot of the things that they sell on the side of the street are deep fried. In Sierra Leone, there's something that they call it fry, and it pretty much is just a whole plethora of different things that have been fried. You have fried plantains, different fried cakes is what they call them. There's rice cake and banana cake and I think even cassava cake, and it's pretty much just they form some sort of a dough out of rice flour or plantains or something like that, and they'll just fry this dough. So it kind of ends up kind of donut-y, but it's a lot more solid than you'd think of a donut. And they'll get just a whole bunch of fried things, and then they'll get some bread I'll open up the bread and you put all these fried things in the bread, and they'll sometimes have like a sauce or a soup that you put on top of it. Really good, probably really fatty, and but it tastes really good. And that was one of the first things my trainer introduced me to, because he's such a great trainer. But we see on the side of the street, street vending is a very common thing there. They have people all over the place. They've set up little stands or a wheelbarrow that they have things in, or in Africa, of course, they carry things on their head. That's not just what you see in movies. That's what they do all the time there. Everything is carried on your head. And so some people will they'll have a bunch of cassava up in a big bin on their head that they'll sell you, or some of these different kinds of cakes that they'll sell you, or fry that they'll sell you, or things like that. So it's easy to find food on the streets. So if you're trying to abstain from it completely, it's kind of tricky, because it's the most easily available food. But I did get food poisoning once from something I ate. But you just have to be careful, I think, with some of the food you eat on the streets. So along the kind of the note of humility that I experienced, the humility of the people that I experienced in Africa, there was a particular man that I taught. He was actually Ghanaian, but he had kind of, through a series of unfortunate events, he wound up in Sierra Leone. And he was extremely poor. He had gone to college, and so he was fairly well educated, but nonetheless found himself kind of without a job. And he tried teaching young kids. He tried teaching them. He kind of opened up a pay what you can school, and because he really thought education was important, and so he didn't have a building, but he more or less offered his service to teach little kids. And so whether it was in a church that was not being used that day, or under a mango tree on some benches, he taught, and he hardly got any money for that, because, like I said, it was just a pay what you can, and people can't really afford very much. And so he had just a handful of kids that he would teach. But we started teaching this man the gospel, and he seemed to catch hold of it very well. He was an individual that kind of had some interesting ideas and a lot of really crazy, interesting life experiences. He had gone through a lot of hard times. He had made a lot of mistakes in his life, and as we were going through the commandments, he's like, "Yes, I've broken that. Yes, I've broken that. Yes, I've broken that." But he was incredibly humble at the same time, and he was just like, you know what? I realize that this is not good. That I should not do that. And he was so willing to follow what we were saying, and he was just very, very accepting. We just worked our way through the lessons pretty quickly, and there was a time where we got to teaching about the law of chastity, and we taught him about it. He accepted it. He decided that was the way he was going to live in his life. But a little while later, it kind of put him to the test a little bit, because he had found a girlfriend in the place in Sierra Leone that he kind of liked, and at the same time he was kind of without a home. He was renting a place for a little while, but he had been kicked out. And so he kind of needed a place to at least put his belongings, and kind of a place to sleep. And so he moved in with this girl, and we talked to him about that. We're like, we taught you about the law of chastity, and he said, yes, I know, and I'm keeping the law of chastity, and he kind of reassured us. But we told him, we're like, you can't continue to live with a girl, because you can't do that. And the temptation is just too great for someone who is trying to keep their lives chaste. And so pretty much that meant for him that he was going to have to go homeless, because she was the only one that was willing to kind of take him in and give him a place to sleep. And so, but as we told him that, as we explained to him that he just can't do that, the risk is not worth it, that he actually did leave the house. I mean, he left his stuff there, but he began sleeping on the seashore in some fisherman's hut, where it was, I guess, got super cold at night, but he was humble and willing to follow what we told him was right, and so he was actually able to go without a home, and that was really inspiring to me. Like, would I go homeless for the gospel? Would I give up, the shelter that I have to sleep in for the gospel? And so that really struck me. And there are so many people like that there that are willing to give up so much for the gospel, and so his story has kind of inspired me ever since then. Like, if I were required to, what would I be willing to give up for what I know to be right? Really, there wasn't any time in my mission where I felt unsafe. There were the governments there are, they're doing well. I think they haven't seen any rebellion for many years, and so most of the time things were just very, very normal. I never felt like I was in danger. I'd say probably the time that I probably suffered the most as far as feeling safe maybe was when I got sick, because they do have some diseases over there that are not as common here in America, such as malaria and typhoid. Malaria there is a pretty common sickness. Like it seems like here when people get sick and they're out for a few days, it's because they have the flu or a cold or something like that. There, it's malaria. They're out of commission for a couple of days, and it's because they had malaria. But anti-malarial medicine is very common over there. You can buy it at any drugstore, just like you could buy cough medicine here. So as long as if you catch the symptoms of malaria on time, which is really not that hard, they teach you how to recognize it. And if you get malaria, then you can treat it, and it's really not that big a deal. But the mission does provide anti-malarial medicine, so you shouldn't have to worry too much about it if you're taking that anti-malarial medicine. They give it to you. They make sure you always have plenty of it, and so you just you take your anti-malarial medicine, and then you'll stay away from malaria. Malaria is a disease that's passed by mosquitoes, and they tell you that it's a particular type of mosquito that usually comes out at night, and so yeah, you'll get mosquito bites, but as long as you're taking that anti-malarial medicine, you should be fine. I did, however, to get malaria a couple times because I wasn't taking my medicine, and it was painful. It was not a good experience, but it was but I was never worried that I was gonna die or anything like that. It was just one of the experiences that that can happen in Africa. So in Liberia, they don't speak Creole like they do in Sierra Leone. And in Liberia, the people call it Kalukwa. That's what they call it. I don't know exactly what that means, but they call it Kalukwa, and it's another form of broken English, but it's not quite as deeply broken as Creole is. They haven't thrown in quite as many new vocabulary words and grammar changes as with Creole, but they do speak very quickly, and I guess the easiest way to describe it is they cut off the ends of their words. Like to say "where are you going," they say "what place you going," or so like "what place are you going?" What place you going? They just cut off the last few letters of every word, and they throw the word "ain't" into their language as much as you can possibly think you could squeeze the word "ain't" in there. Like, I ain't know, like I don't know, I ain't know what you're doing. It meant left me, like, or no, that's a little bit of Creole, but they would say like, anyway, and so it gets to the point where they're cutting it off so much and they're speaking so quickly that it can still be very hard when you're first arriving there to understand them. I remember when I was in Sierra Leone, or sorry, when I was in Liberia. When I was in Liberia, I had a companion that was brand new, straight from the United States, and I was training him in Liberia, and I remember going to sacrament meeting, and they were speaking this Kalukwa in sacrament meeting. Someone was up giving a talk or something in sacrament meeting, and my companion was just sitting there reading his scriptures because he couldn't understand the thing they were saying. I'm like, it's not that hard, and but I guess when you first get introduced to this Kalukwa, it's different enough that you still can have a little bit of a tricky time understanding it. But I would say that you pick up on it even faster than you do with Creole, because it's like I said, it's not as different from English as Creole is. And in Missionaries even learn how to speak it a little bit. But the great one thing about Liberia is that if you're from America, they can probably understand you just speaking normal English better than they could understand you in Sierra Leone, because Liberia is an American colony. Whereas Sierra Leone is a British colony, so they have British influenced English. Liberia is an American colony, so they have American influenced English. And they really like to think that they sound like Americans. They're like, oh yeah, Liberia, we're the American Africans. But they're not. I mean, but their language is closer to American English than it is to British English. And so I remember when I was in Liberia, I had a companion from Ghana. And in Ghana is also a British colony. And so Ghana also has kind of a British influenced English. And so when I was in Liberia, a native Liberian told me that they could understand my English better than they could understand my Ghanaian companion's English. And I was really flattered by that. I was like, oh, that's cool. That must be because, the way that you speak is slightly more similar to the way that we speak in America. And so as far as you being understood in Liberia, it's a lot easier because of the language in America, the way that we speak English, and the accents that we put on words in English. Whereas in Sierra Leone, it's probably easier for them to understand the Ghanaian companions right off the bat because of where their language is influenced. And so yeah, communication in Liberia is not nearly, doesn't take as long to learn as it does in Sierra Leone. But it's fun though. It's a fun language. Liberia has a lot of cultural similarities as well, but a lot of cultural differences too. So when you receive your mission call, it says you've been called to preach, in Sierra Leone in the English language. And that's a little bit deceptive, not deceptive. No, they don't try and deceive you, but when you get there and you hear them start talking on the streets, you don't think English. That's not what you think. They speak Creole, it's spelled K-R-I-O. There are a lot of places that you'll hear that have Creole languages, like a French Creole or a Haitian Creole or something like that. Well, Creole, I think it's a type of Creole language, but it's called Creole. It's only spoken in Sierra Leone. It's similar to some other pidgin languages. It kind of resembles the way they talk in Nigeria, a little bit how they talk in Jamaica. But when you go there and you first walk out on the street and you hear people just chattering back and forth to each other in Creole, you don't understand a thing. It's like, what is this? Like you maybe understand one or two words, but it's because Creole is a language that originally derived from English, I think, but then they took English and they threw in vocabulary from like 100 different languages, and they took the grammar out, put a whole new set of grammar rules in there, and so if you were to hear someone speaking it slowly, you'd probably be able to understand maybe about half of what they're saying. You'd hear a few words in there that are like, oh, what does that mean? And so I went out and I decided that I really wanted to learn a foreign language on my mission, and this was the best opportunity I had to learn a foreign language, was to learn Creole, and really it's a necessity. There are some missionaries that pick up on it more quickly and more thoroughly than others, but I would say it's a necessity because although you are preaching in English, and my mission president liked to emphasize that, he wanted us to teach in English as much as we could. But on the streets, it's Creole. Everyone Creole, that's what they speak in their home, that's what they speak in their business, is Creole. And so they do learn English in school, but for those that haven't been to school, like the little kids, and that haven't been to much school yet, they haven't learned a lot of English, because growing up they learned Creole in their house. And then some of the old folks too, that they never had money to go to school, or they've lived in a village their whole life, and so they have never really learned how to speak English. And so there were a few times where I had to revert to strictly Creole, and so it was beneficial to learn. And so I decided to, again, just put my foot, one foot forward and just keep going and striving to learn the language. I had some good missionaries that, some American missionaries that had to learn Creole themselves, that were able to help me, and more or less just telling me definitions of words. I'm like, okay, I heard this word today, what does it mean? Okay, I heard this word today, what does it mean? And I would ask them, and they'd help me with vocabulary. I even remember I got a little neighbor kid one time to help teach me grammar. And there were a few things that I learned right off the bat. Like the first phrase that you learn is "Howdy Boddy." It's just a greeting. It means "How are you?" Directly translated, it would mean "How is your body?" I guess, but they don't think of it like that. I mean, you don't think of it like that. It's just a common greeting, like "How are you?" And so you just say "Howdy Boddy." And they say, "Do body well," or "Fine." Fine is a very common thing there. They say "fine" for everything. They don't say, "Oh, I'm fantastic," or "I'm great." No, it's "fine," "fine," or "Do body well," or "How you they do" is another way of just saying "How are you?" "How you they do." You can kind of hear where it comes from, how you are doing, or but. So yeah, I just learned Creole bit by bit as I went along through talking to people on the streets, through talking to companions, through talking to investigators, and I remember marking this, I think in my journal or something. About 4 months in, I got to the point where I could hold on a basic conversation in Creole without having to revert to English or ask about words in English, and so. And that was pretty cool. And then after that, it was just building up my vocabulary and learning new words. And even still, I'm not I don't speak Creole perfectly even still, because but I did learn it enough that I could teach lessons in it if I needed to. I could do baptismal interviews in Creole. I could get by talking to anyone on the streets, and I actually got to the point where people were kind of impressed that here's this white man speaking Creole. Because first of all, they don't see white men very often. Second of all, to hear one speaking and sounding kind of like they do it kind of impressed the people, which is another reason I would say to learn Creole, is because it kind of helps to gain some respect from the people, I think, when they see that you're caring enough about them to learn their language. I think it shows kind of humility, that you're willing to bring yourself to the same level that they are, and speaking their same language. So if someone asks me to speak Creole, it's like, okay, what do I say? But I'll tell them, the time where I've been in a salon, I've been talking Creole better one past mark. So I've been talking so well, so the people they no go able to say if me a white man or me a black man. Past they look see me kinda, because the way we have been talking been clear past mark. So beaucoup people they've been like too much when they talk to Creole. So now Creole, if people like English, but not half English. If a person go take English, then go chop in pieces, and then they go put other word them from other language and put it inside, and then they go get the Creole. So the time we kind of salon, now sometimes you don't go hearing nothing, but past you they can't used to and small. You go listen to them, you go ask people them what in they talk. You go to listen, you go to hear, you go to safu, you go hear what in they talk. And I don't say where I don't talk to Creole, so I know easy for talk on Google one, but down there in Creole. So I think you're probably able to understand maybe about half of it. There's a word here and there that you can kind of be like, oh, okay, I can see where this originally was English. But then you have a few other words that they call them deep Creole, that are completely different. Like to understand, you just say yuri, which is kind of derived from here. That's one example. Or there's the word. I remember one of the first deep Creole words I learned was "falamakata," which means copycat, and it sounds almost like it was derived from photocopy at some point. Falamakata, or Another deep Creole word would be "tan," which means is similar. Like Creole "tan" like English. Creole is similar to English, or "fiba," which means look like. It's similar to "tan," but it means look like. So like you could say, "Mi afiba mi papa." I look like my dad. There are a few other words, like in teaching the gospel, there are actually a couple of Creole words that really come in handy when you're teaching the gospel, because when you're teaching the Ten Commandments and you teach the word covet in English, and if you're using the word covet in English, you may run across some people that know what it means to covet, and others that it's a word that you don't learn until maybe later. But they have a word there in Africa that they understand very well. The word for it is mille. And they say, you just say, for mille, which means thou shalt not covet. And they understand it very well. It's a common phrase there. Whereas here in America, it's not that common to use the word covet. Another deep Creole word is tawa. And tawa means to endure. So that's another word that's used when teaching the gospel a lot. You go say, you for tawa till you die. Like if you're going to say you endure to the end, tawa till you die. Just endure until you die, pretty much. Now, that's one thing about Creole is there are not very many direct translations. I think Creole kind of has a smaller vocabulary. There are slightly fewer words in Creole than there are in English, and so sometimes you just kind of have to make do with what words you have to make them fit. Obviously, the more deep Creole you learn, the better you'll be able to communicate in straight Creole without having to revert to English. But as you're speaking Creole, if you do revert to English here and there, it's okay, because most of the people speak English, and because Creole is derived from English, a lot of Creole words are just the English word for that, but just with an African accent. And so, like, I is ah, I de go, I am going. And so it's yeah. So if you don't understand it completely, you don't have to worry about it. You can learn it word by word and use it word by word, and that's what makes it a great language to learn. In Sierra Leone, the way that we did most of our contacting was not by knocking on people's doors. It was just by talking to them in the streets, because most people in Sierra Leone spend their time outside of their house. The house is more or less a place to sleep at night, and then everything else they do outside, they cook outside and whatnot. But so as we would go around teaching or contacting people, we would always invite them to church. So to do that in Creole, you say, "Mi name na Elda Lo," and this na mi compi in name na whatever Elda Amoa, for example, and. We want to invite you for can visit we na church. You sabi we church day. We church ide yonder ide na the road don yonder. We meet any Sunday but in 10 o'clock. We want to ask you if we want to come visit we na Sunday. And so that's just inviting them to church. It's telling them our church is down on such and such street, and we want to invite you to come visit us on Sunday. And a lot of people would accept and never show up, but let me think of something else that's a common phrase in Creole. Like to ask someone, "Where are you going?" You say, "Usai you de go." Usai is where, and you de go, are you going? In Sierra Leone, if you want to sit down and talk to someone, almost anyone will sit down and talk with you. They'll listen. Now that's a great thing about Sierra Leone and about West Africa as a whole, I think, is that the people there are very humble. They're very teachable, and they're not, too busy to just sit down and talk for a minute. Their life is a little bit more relaxed. And they tend to be, like I said, more humble. And so if you walk up to someone and you say, "Hey, I have a message to share. Would you mind if I just took a few minutes and sat down and shared with you a message about God?" They would do it. They'd be like, "Oh, sure, yeah." And they'd be, if they were out, selling things or just out doing housework or something like that, they'd more than likely take a few minutes and sit down and talk with you. And so. You could, if you wanted to, just spend all your time just teaching lessons on the streets. And so, finding people to teach is usually not the hardest part of a mission in Africa. and that's or at least in West Africa, and that at least that's what I found, is that people there are very willing to hear the gospel. Whether or not they're willing to follow it, though, that's the tricky thing. Finding someone who is, at a point in their life that they're willing to actually make changes, not just listen to someone, but also to make changes in their life, to give up old habits, or to give up practices that they've been doing for a long time, to do something that requires a lot of effort. When you're making the transition from living a non-gospel oriented life to changing to a gospel oriented life, it requires a lot of change. And so that becomes one of the hard things, is to try and find people that are willing to make the change, not just to hear you, not even just to get baptized. Sometimes you could probably baptize many people that were not truly converted, and that hadn't really changed their life over, or had not truly given their life over to God. And so that becomes part of the work of a missionary, is to kind of sift through the people, find those that truly are prepared, and those that are ready and to accept the gospel wholeheartedly into their lives.